Welcome to lesson 12 of the Judaism beliefs unit for EDUCAS Route B. Today's lesson is going to focus on what are the mitzvot duties and how do they link to free will. And the overarching question here again is, can Jews actually have free will? If there's an expectation that they must follow certain rules and regulations, is that actually freedom? So again, that could come up in an evaluation 15 mark D question surrounding whether or not Jews should have to follow all of the mitzvot or only some, or should they be able to exercise their free will. To get us started, a really quick revisit section. You'll see, unlike normally, it's not short answer questions. It is essentially a B question. So a B question, if you remember, is worth 5 marks. It always begins with the word describe. So a description is a very basic command. It's just asking you to describe, so in a few sentences, 2 different points for why the 10 commandments are important to Jews. You don't need to give an enormous amount of detail, and you don't need to show any implications. So you don't need to show, the relevance perhaps today, depending on how the question's asked. Now you'll see I've put a couple of words here that you might consider using, and I'm going to ask you to pause the video for around 5 minutes. That's how long you would have in an exam situation to complete this question. So around 5 minutes, try to answer it in as much detail as you can using full sentences, and feel free to use the sentence starters I have here, but you don't have to. Okay, so 5 minutes please. Okay, so 5 minutes should have elapsed. I'm going to show you a sample, a waggle answer that I've put together. You can see it there just in the box underneath the cursor. So you can see the answer I've written. Firstly, the 10 commandments are important for the Jews because it tells them that they should obey God and that there is only one God. So for example, I am the Lord your God. This matters because Jews are monotheistic as shown in the Shema prayer. Remember, the Shema prayer does say, "O hear, O Israel, there is but one God." Secondly, the commandments are important in Judaism because they teach Jews how they should treat each other. For example, do not kill and do not bear false witness. Both show that life is sacred and it should be preserved, but also that lying is wrong. Zedekah shows that Jews believe people should be just. And you can see there I've not gone into a huge amount of detail with explanation or linking back to key concepts. It's literally just a description. So using my sample answer, please do self-mark your own answer in green pen. Anything that you've not included, for example, some of the key terms that I may have used, please do add those now, and I'll give you around 2 minutes to do so. Okay, so to get us started on today's learning, you want to consider the importance of rules generally in life for all people, religious or otherwise. So what I'd like you to do, as you can see from the description here, and you can do that in your booklet just underneath, create a spider diagram around the word rules. So write the word rules in the middle. And these might be rules at home, religious rules at school or in the street. Make note of as many rules as you can think of outside of here. So for example, a home rule for you might be that you must put your own dishes in the dishwasher. Or a rule on the street is that you should not litter. So put as many as you can think around the word rules in a spider diagram, and then choose the 5 that you think are the most important and highlight them, and then explain why they're important to you. So for example, that street rule that you should not litter, it's important to me because I like to go outside and have a clean environment. And it's important that we have rules on the street to govern what people are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. So if you want to do that for me quickly in about 3 or 4 minutes. Okay, so let's get on to the first knowledge phase. That is all about the 613 mitzvot. Now the consolidation here will be to highlight along with me and make notes as I direct. Okay, so let's get started. It is difficult to find a word in English that really translates mitzvot, as it has more than one meaning. For some, it's keeping the duties given by God to Moses, so just highlight duties. It could be doing good deeds or being given an honor, such as reading for the Torah. So generally, they are seen as rules, regulations, things that should be done in order to consider yourself a practicing Jew. Okay, to move on, the Talmud refers to the 613 mitzvot in the Torah. So just highlight the Talmud in this section here. Okay, and I think it's important just to explain really quickly what the Talmud is. Do excuse me, I need to fix that. Okay, so I have that sorted. The Talmud is one of what I call the 3 T's, so the Tanakh, the Talmud, the Torah. And they are sources of wisdom. So I would put an arrow out of the word Torah and write sources of wisdom. And again, I'm just doing this in shorthand, so it's not going to have the best punctuation. And essentially the Talmud is a source of Jewish theology. So pop that in there, of Jewish theology. Okay. And it is seen as a guide for daily life. Okay, so it's more practical. It's not scripture as such, so it's not the Torah, it's not, the 5 books given to Moses. It is more a grouping or a collection of reflections on the Torah and the implications for how a Jew should live. So a collection of reflections on the Torah. And it has different parts, but we will be doing a lesson later on the kind of sacred and daily scriptures for Jews. So that will do. It's important, whenever you're answering exam questions, in reality, if it's about how a Jew should live or anything they do in their daily life, it is going to be in the Talmud. So even if you don't know the exact reference or source or quotation, if you refer to the Talmud, you will absolutely get marks for using a source of wisdom. Okay, so let's move on. I'll just get my highlighting tool back again. Okay, so the number is represented by the number of knots on the talit. Okay, so just highlight that for me there. And if you remember, the talit is the prayer shawl. Okay, so it's normally white with black stripes down the bottom, and it has little tassels at the end of each side, and there are 613. So again, that just kind of reminds them of these mitzvot. And the talit is what we call an aid to prayer, and again, there will be a whole lesson on items or aids to prayer in Judaism, which is worn by many Jews during worship. Importantly, if you are Orthodox, it is only men who wear the talit. However, if you are a Reformed Jew, a more liberal Jew, then both men and women can wear those. Today, it is impossible to keep all 613 mitzvot, so highlight that, as they were connected with religious practices in the temple, so highlight that, which was destroyed. Now that's quite important, because one of the key questions, as we already know, is whether Jews have free will, whether they should have to keep all the mitzvot, and in reality it's an impossibility to keep all 613. So I've just scrolled down there for Orthodox Jews. So remember your more traditional Jews who see the Torah as the word of God. Keeping the mitzvot is an important principle of Judaism. So it is something that sets Judaism apart from perhaps other Abrahamic faiths. Although many Reform Jews also try to keep the mitzvot, many consider that some are no longer compatible with 21st century life. Okay, so just to give you a little example of that, and we might want to make a note of it here, and hopefully I do it properly this time. Let's do it in a little comment. There are lots of mitzvot that may not be relevant anymore. So mitzvot not relevant. So for example, there are particular mitzvot about land, how you should farm the land. So those about farming obviously are not going to be relevant if you're not a farm owner. There are ones about types of cloth that can be worn. Again, perhaps no longer relevant, that it's okay to wear two different kinds of cloth, and consider a lot of our clothes are synthetic and man-made. This idea of not being able to wear cotton and silk together just doesn't seem to be relevant at all. On a side note, it is why your ultra-Orthodox, Ashkenazi, your Hasidic Jew, that is why their clothes look a particular way. It's why they wear black and white, and why the clothes are very simple, because they're trying to keep that mitzvot in the 21st century. There are also lots of other mitzvot about ritual purity, so things that you can and can't touch, which would mean that in a modern context, Jews are not permitted to have certain kinds of jobs. And now if you live in the Midlands and you're a Jew, you perhaps would find it difficult to get certain kinds of jobs because of some of the mitzvot about what you can and can't touch. So most Reform Jews would say that those ones are just not relevant anymore. Okay, so do make note of some of those. So back to my highlighting tool. So those kinds of Jews would say decisions about which ones to observe are often based on individual choices. Okay, so that's kind of where the free will comes in. It's not that you have the freedom to do whatever you want, but you have the freedom to choose which mitzvot to follow. Just as with the Ten Commandments, the mitzvot either show how people should relate to God or how we should relate to other people. Through both types of actions, Jews believe they build a relationship with God. So that is the important point about the mitzvot. It's not just to constrain life, it improves our relationship with God. And as a religious person, that is what your ultimate goal in life would be. The Torah explains the purpose of human existence is to achieve this closeness with God. This is attained through observing the mitzvah, and each is believed in its own unique way to build a relationship with God. Is any one of the 613 mitzvot more important than another? Now that is kind of a really good question to ask. So are there some that are really bad if you don't keep, or are there some that it's a misdemeanor, it's not really a big deal if you don't keep it? So again, a story in the Talmud, that book we were talking about earlier on, tells how Hillel was asked what was the central duty of the Torah. He replied, "That which is hateful unto you, do not do to your neighbor." So that is kind of a summary, and it might sound familiar to you. Although Jews do not accept Jesus as the Messiah, a lot of his teachings are hinged on so many things within Judaism. So, Jesus says, treat others as you want to be treated and love your neighbor. And they are Christian teachings, so don't refer to them in that way in your Judaism paper. But essentially, this extract from the Talmud is sort of saying the same thing. So whatever you don't like, don't do to someone else. Okay, this is the whole of the Torah. The rest is commentary. Go forth and study. And this is quite an important bit here. Go forth and study. Now you may remember from when we watched a bit of Strictly Kosher that a lot of Orthodox Jews believe that men should spend some time, ideally in Israel, studying the Torah, studying the Talmud and the Tanakh. And I suppose this is perhaps where it comes from, this idea that you should fully understand your faith. So you might want to make a note of that in the side. This meant that although there are many mitzvot, it is through the practice of treating people with respect that Jews build their relationship with God. So this is kind of an alternate view. Although most Jews would consider the actual mitzvah in the Torah as important, how each mitzvah relates to modern day developments may be interpreted differently. So this is important, that interpretation. So as a Reformed Jew, you might understand the mitzvah in different ways. You understand that they're important, but how they apply to the life that you lead may be different. So you can see here, I've kind of tried to explain some of the potential differences of opinion. So we know thou shalt not kill is one of the 10 commandments. It is a key belief in many religions, but especially in Judaism. But how does that apply to certain issues surrounding abortion? Is it ever permissible to have an abortion? And what we'll come to see when we look at Pikuach Nefesh is that perhaps in some situations, depending on what kind of Jew you are, abortion is permissible. Contraception, from a Catholic point of view, contraception cannot be permitted because it prevents life, and also some forms of contraception actually stop not just fertilization but implantation, and therefore from a Catholic point of view you're actually ending a life. And we need to consider whether or not for Jews that could be interpreted in a similar way. Self-defense, are you permitted to kill somebody if they're trying to kill you? What about issues surrounding nuclear attacks? If it came to another world war, are Jews permitted to be involved in warfare? Turning off life support machines, is somebody already de facto dead if they're on a life support machine? Are you removing extraordinary means? All of these things are debatable. And the last one, killing animals. Should animals be killed in a particular way? Is it okay to eat meat? When it's saying thou shalt not kill, is it talking about just human beings? So lots of potential discussion surround these kind of key ethical points. And just to finish off this little section, the 613 mitzvot as religious duties are grouped. So they're not just a list. They're kind of divided into two main sections. So you have mitzvah aseh, so positive commandments, say what you should do. Okay, so for example, keep the Sabbath holy. And there are 365 mitzvot ta'aseh, which are negative commandments that say what you should not do. So thou shalt not kill. Just to check that we're all okay with the previous knowledge section, if you could complete this gap fill. And again, gap fills are very useful for helping you structure your sentences and also answer certain types of exam questions. So I would suggest you spend about 5 or 6 minutes completing the gap fill. Okay, so you should have paused that and completed it yourself. I would suggest that you take these activities as incredibly important to try yourself, and then obviously you can check your answers against mine. So please make sure that you self-mark in green pen in your booklet. There's just a few little points that I wanted to make. This section would be very, very useful if you were asked to answer a question, describe the importance of mitzvot in Judaism, or a couple of paragraphs explaining what the mitzvot are. So very useful indeed. There's just a couple more things. You'll see here there is an image of a pomegranate, which is a key symbol in Judaism. Now what you might notice from a pomegranate is that it has an awful lot of seeds inside it. Now, just like the tassels on the prayer shawl that has 613 threads, Jews would say that the pomegranate has 613 seeds. Now obviously it may or may not. It could have a lot more, could have a lot less. That's not the point. It's just symbolic of the importance. So pomegranate would be a common fruit to eat at certain festivals, especially mitzvah day. Okay, so green pen, as I said, and we'll move on. Okay, so we're on to the application and testing phase. So just before we move on, you'll see that obviously there are just so many mitzvot, and we know that they're broken down into positive and negative, as we have here, assay to assay, but then they're further broken down into ones that are about our relationship with God and others that are about our relationship with other people. So what I wanted you to do, just to make sure that you understand that as a concept, you'll see that there's an activity underneath, and there is a blank grid just below this as well. What I want you to do is read each one of these mitzvah, okay, and decide whether they, first of all, are between man and God or between man and man, and whether they are positive or negative. So for example, if I just pick one and model it for you, this one here says you are to love God. Now obviously that is between man and God, and it is a positive one because it's something that you should do. So you would write in here, love God. If we were then to look at a second one, so this one here, do not deal harshly with widows or orphans. So that is how you treat other people. So it's between man and man. And it's something you should not do. So it's a negative, do not deal harshly. So that would go into this box here. So what I'd like you to do is to go into your larger version of this grid. And as I said, for each one of the mitzvah above, decide whether it's between man and God, between man and man, whether it's positive, something you should do, or negative, something you should not do. I reckon that should take you about 5 minutes. Off you go. So I'll leave you to complete that section, that testing section yourself. Please remember that you need to keep in contact with your teachers, and I would always suggest that this work is uploaded to your individual teacher via Firefly, just to check that you're keeping up with lessons. God bless.